The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace courtyard as 8-year-old Princess Elena walked beside her mother, Queen Isabella, toward the grand throne room. Today was different from their usual peaceful mornings. The Queen had been unusually quiet during breakfast, her fingers nervously adjusting her emerald necklace while palace guards whispered urgently in the corridors. Elena noticed everything, though adults often forgot how observant children could be. She saw how her mother's smile seemed forced, how the head guard Captain Rodriguez kept glancing toward the main gates, and how the usual cheerful chatter among the servants had been replaced by hushed conversations that stopped whenever she approached. The palace had been their safe haven for as long as Elena could remember. Her father, King Carlos, was away on a diplomatic mission to neighboring kingdoms, leaving the Queen to handle royal duties alone. Elena loved these times when she could shadow her mother, learning about ruling a kingdom by watching the Queen's graceful interactions with visiting nobles, merchants, and common citizens who came seeking justice or assistance. As they entered the throne room, Elena immediately sensed tension in the air. The usual group of mourning petitioners seemed different today. Among the familiar faces of local farmers and merchants stood several men she had never seen before. They wore fine clothes, but their eyes held a coldness that made Elena instinctively step closer to her mother. Queen Isabella took her place on the ornate throne, gesturing for Elena to sit on the smaller chair beside her. This was their routine during public audiences, and Elena had grown comfortable in her role as the observing princess, learning statecraft through watching her mother's wisdom in action. The first few petitioners presented typical requests. A farmer needed help with a land dispute, a merchant sought permission to expand his shop, and a widow requested assistance for her sick child. Queen Isabella handled each case with her characteristic patience and fairness, but Elena noticed her mother's hands remained tightly clasped, a sign of stress she had learned to recognize. Then came the strangers. Their leader, a tall man with a carefully groomed beard and expensive silk clothing, stepped forward with an elaborate bow. He introduced himself as Lord Marcus from a distant province, claiming to bring greetings and gifts from his region. His words were polite and proper, exactly what court protocol demanded. But something in his tone made Elena's skin crawl. Lord Marcus spoke eloquently about trade agreements and mutual benefits, but Elena watched her mother's face grow increasingly pale. The Queen's responses became shorter, more formal, and Elena noticed how Captain Rodriguez had quietly positioned himself closer to the throne, his hand resting casually on his sword hilt. The conversation continued for what felt like hours, though Elena knew it was probably only minutes. Lord Marcus and his companions kept steering the discussion toward topics that seemed to make her mother uncomfortable. They asked detailed questions about the king's return date, the current strength of the palace guard, and the location of the royal treasury. Elena's young mind began connecting pieces that the adults might not realize she understood. These men were not here for trade or friendship. Their questions were too specific, too focused on the palace's vulnerabilities. When Lord Marcus casually mentioned that they had noticed how few guards were stationed at the eastern gate, Elena felt a chill run down her spine. Queen Isabella maintained her composure magnificently, answering questions with diplomatic skill while revealing nothing of importance. But Elena could see the strain in her mother's posture, the way her breathing had become slightly faster, and how her eyes occasionally darted toward the throne room's exits as if calculating escape routes. The audience was supposed to be a routine morning session, but Elena realized they were in the middle of something far more dangerous. These men were gathering information, testing the palace's defenses, and perhaps planning something terrible. The absence of her father suddenly seemed less like a normal diplomatic mission and more like a carefully planned opportunity for these strangers to strike. As Lord Marcus prepared to make what seemed like his final request, Elena noticed her mother's posture change subtly. The Queen's back straightened, her chin lifted slightly, and her hands moved to rest on the arms of her throne in a very specific position. Elena had seen this exact posture before, though she could not immediately remember when or why it seemed so significant. The throne room felt increasingly oppressive as Elena watched the dangerous game of words continue between her mother and the mysterious visitors. Every instinct told her that their family was in immediate danger, but she was just a child sitting beside her mother's throne, expected to remain silent and observe. What could she possibly do to help in such a frightening situation? The answer would come to her soon enough, along with the memory of a very important lesson her mother had taught her just weeks before. A lesson about signals, safety, and the special responsibility that came with being a princess who might one day need to protect her kingdom and the people she loved. 3 weeks earlier, on a quiet afternoon in the palace gardens, Queen Isabella had pulled Elena aside for what seemed like an ordinary mother-daughter conversation. They sat beneath the ancient oak tree where Elena loved to read, surrounded by blooming roses and the gentle sound of the garden fountain. "Elena, my precious daughter," the queen had said, her voice carrying an unusual seriousness. "There are things a princess must know that other children never need to learn." Elena had looked up from her book, curious about her mother's formal tone. The queen rarely spoke to her with such gravity, unless she was about to share important royal lessons about leadership, diplomacy, or the responsibilities of their position. Queen Isabella had taken Elena's small hands in her own, her eyes scanning the garden to ensure they were completely alone. Even the usual presence of nearby guards had been dismissed for this particular conversation, leaving mother and daughter in complete privacy among the flowers and butterflies. "Sometimes," the queen continued, "people will come to our palace who pretend to be friends but are actually enemies. They will smile and speak politely, but their true intentions will be to harm our family or our kingdom." Elena had nodded solemnly, though she struggled to imagine such deception. The palace had always felt like the safest place in the world, protected by loyal guards and filled with people who loved and served their royal family with genuine devotion. The queen had then taught Elena about something she called the silent language of protection. She explained that throughout history, royal families had developed secret signals that could communicate danger without alerting enemies who might be watching and listening. "If I ever raise my right hand and touch my left shoulder while sitting on the throne," Queen Isabella had demonstrated the gesture carefully, "it means there is immediate danger in the throne room. But Elena, this signal is not just for the guards to see, it is also for you." Elena had watched intently as her mother showed her the exact movement. The gesture looked natural and casual, like someone adjusting their clothing or jewelry. But Elena understood it was actually a carefully designed secret communication. "When you see this signal," the queen had continued, "you must do something very specific. You must raise your right hand as if you are asking a question or want to speak, but you must hold your hand in a special way." The queen had then shown Elena how to position her fingers. It looked like a normal raised hand, but the thumb and little finger were extended while the middle 3 fingers were folded down. To anyone watching, it would appear that the princess simply wanted to participate in the royal audience. "This return signal tells our most trusted guards that you have understood the danger warning," Queen Isabella had explained. "It activates a special protection plan that Captain Rodriguez and his most loyal men have practiced many times." Elena had been both thrilled and frightened by this secret knowledge. The idea of having special signals made her feel important and grown up. But the thought that such signals might actually be needed someday had filled her with worry. The queen had made Elena practice the signal several times until she could perform it naturally and quickly. They had even created a little game where Elena had to recognize her mother's danger signal and respond correctly, turning the serious lesson into something that felt more manageable for a young child. "Remember, my darling," Queen Isabella had said as they concluded their secret lesson, "this knowledge makes you a guardian of our family's safety. You are not just a princess who will someday wear a crown. You are a protector who must help keep our kingdom safe from those who would harm innocent people." Elena had promised to remember everything, though she had secretly hoped she would never need to use such frightening knowledge. The afternoon had ended with the queen hugging her tightly, and they had returned to their normal activities as if the serious conversation had never happened. In the days that followed, Elena had occasionally caught herself watching her mother during royal audiences, looking for any sign of the danger signal. But every day had been peaceful and routine, filled with the usual parade of loyal subjects seeking help, merchants proposing trade agreements, and visiting nobles paying their respects. The secret had become something Elena carried quietly in the back of her mind, like a special treasure that she hoped she would never need to unwrap. She had even begun to wonder if her mother had been overly cautious in teaching her such dramatic precautions. Now, sitting in the throne room watching Lord Marcus and his suspicious companions, Elena finally understood why her mother had insisted on preparing her for this moment. The danger was real, immediate, and unlike anything the palace had faced during Elena's young lifetime. As the memory of that garden conversation flooded back to her, Elena's heart began beating faster. She watched her mother's hands more carefully, knowing that at any moment she might see the signal that would change everything and force her to become the protector her mother had trained her to be. The weight of responsibility suddenly felt enormous for such a small girl, but Elena steeled herself for whatever was coming. Her mother had trusted her with this secret knowledge, and she would not fail when the moment came to prove herself worthy of that trust. Back in the throne room, Lord Marcus was becoming increasingly bold with his questions. What had started as polite diplomatic conversation was now clearly an interrogation designed to gather intelligence about the palace's defenses and weaknesses. "Your Majesty," Lord Marcus said with a smile that never reached his eyes, "we have heard wonderful things about your kingdom's prosperity. Perhaps you could tell us more about how you store and protect such valuable resources." Queen Isabella's response was diplomatic but vague. "Our kingdom's greatest treasure is the happiness and safety of our people, Lord Marcus. Material wealth means nothing without the loyalty and love of those we serve." Elena watched the exchange with growing alarm. She could see that Lord Marcus was becoming frustrated with her mother's careful non-answers. His companions had begun spreading out slightly around the throne room, positioning themselves in ways that made Elena deeply uncomfortable. One of the men had moved closer to the main door, while another had casually walked toward the side entrance that led to the royal family's private quarters. Their movements seemed random to anyone not paying close attention, but Elena realized they were systematically blocking the room's exits. Captain Rodriguez had clearly noticed the same thing. Elena saw him make subtle hand signals to other guards stationed around the throne room. The loyal soldiers began adjusting their own positions, but they had to be careful not to appear threatening while potentially dangerous visitors were present. The situation was becoming a deadly chess game, with each side trying to gain advantage while maintaining the pretense of a normal royal audience. Elena felt trapped in the middle, a small piece on a board where the stakes were life and death for her family and everyone in the palace. Lord Marcus suddenly changed tactics, addressing Elena directly for the first time. "And what a lovely princess you have, Your Majesty. She must bring you such joy during these times when the king is away on his long journey." The way he emphasized long journey made Elena's skin crawl. It was clear that these men knew exactly where her father was and how long he would be gone. This was not a random visit but a carefully planned attack, timed for when the palace would be most vulnerable. Queen Isabella's hand moved slightly on the arm of her throne, and Elena's attention snapped to her mother's movements. This was it. She was about to see the signal that would change everything. "Yes," the Queen replied to Lord Marcus. "Elena is indeed my greatest treasure. She has been learning so much about leadership and responsibility lately." As she spoke these words, Queen Isabella's right hand rose gracefully and touched her left shoulder, adjusting her royal sash in what appeared to be a casual, motherly gesture. But Elena recognized the signal immediately. The danger warning had been given. Elena's heart pounded as she processed what this meant. Her mother had confirmed that these men posed an immediate threat to their safety. The polite diplomatic conversation was over, even though Lord Marcus and his companions did not yet know it. Now it was Elena's turn to complete the secret communication. She had to give the return signal that would let Captain Rodriguez and the loyal guards know that the royal family was ready for whatever protective action needed to be taken. Elena took a deep breath and slowly raised her right hand, positioning her fingers exactly as her mother had taught her in the garden 3 weeks earlier. To anyone watching, she appeared to be a young princess politely requesting permission to speak during the royal audience. But Captain Rodriguez knew better. His eyes met Elena's for just a moment, and she saw recognition flash across his face. The secret signal had been received and understood. What happened next would depend on the training and loyalty of the palace guard, but Elena had done her part. She had successfully communicated the danger and activated whatever protection plan her mother and Captain Rodriguez had prepared. For exactly this type of situation, Lord Marcus noticed Elena's raised hand and smiled in a way that made her feel sick. Does the little princess have something to say? How delightful. Children often see things that adults miss. His words carried a threatening undertone that made Elena realize these men might have been planning to use her as leverage against her mother. The thought terrified her, but she also felt a surge of pride that she had helped foil their plans by alerting the guards. Queen Isabella looked at Elena with eyes full of love and gratitude. "My daughter has learned that sometimes the most important communications happen without words," she said, meaningfully. Elena understood that her mother was acknowledging her successful completion of the secret signal. Whatever was about to happen, they would face it together, protected by loyal guards who now knew exactly what kind of danger they were dealing with. The throne room had become a powder keg waiting to explode, but Elena no longer felt helpless. She had proven herself capable of protecting her family when it mattered most, just as her mother had taught her. Now all they could do was trust in the courage and skill of the brave men who had sworn to defend the royal family with their lives. Captain Rodriguez had served the royal family for 15 years, and he had never hoped more desperately that his emergency plans would never be needed. But when he saw Princess Elena's carefully positioned hand signal, he knew that years of preparation were about to be put to the ultimate test. The captain had noticed Lord Marcus and his men the moment they entered the palace grounds. Something about their movements, the way they observed everything while pretending to admire the architecture, and their too detailed questions about palace security had immediately raised his suspicions. What Captain Rodriguez had not shared with anyone, including the Queen, was that he had received warning about these exact men from loyal contacts in neighboring kingdoms. Lord Marcus was not a legitimate noble but the leader of a notorious group of criminals who specialized in infiltrating royal courts, gathering intelligence, and then staging elaborate heists or kidnapping plots. The captain's informants had told him that Lord Marcus's group had successfully robbed 3 royal treasuries in the past 2 years, always using the same method. They would pose as visiting diplomats, study the target palace's defenses and routines, and then return later with a larger force to execute their criminal plans. But this time was different. This time Captain Rodriguez had been expecting them. When Elena raised her hand with the secret signal, the captain felt a mixture of pride and heartbreak. Pride because the young princess had proven herself worthy of the trust her mother had placed in her, but heartbreak because such a young child should never have to face this kind of danger. Captain Rodriguez activated the emergency plan by touching the pommel of his sword 3 times, a signal that looked like a nervous habit but actually alerted every loyal guard in the throne room that they were now dealing with confirmed enemies rather than potentially suspicious visitors. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Rather than immediately arresting Lord Marcus and his men, which could result in a violent confrontation that might endanger the royal family, the guards would systematically isolate and neutralize the threat while maintaining the appearance of normal court proceedings. Guard Lieutenant Santos, positioned near the main entrance, began implementing the first phase of the plan. He stepped forward and addressed Lord Marcus with perfect politeness. "My lord, His Majesty the King has just sent word that he wishes to extend special hospitality to visiting nobles from your region. If you would permit me, I would be honored to show you and your companions to the royal guest quarters, where refreshments have been prepared." Lord Marcus hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave the throne room before completing whatever intelligence-gathering mission had brought him there. But refusing such an offer would be a serious breach of court etiquette that could expose his true intentions. "That is most generous," Lord Marcus replied carefully, "but we would not wish to impose on Her Majesty's valuable time. Perhaps we could conclude our diplomatic discussions first." Lieutenant Santos smiled warmly while his hand rested casually on his sword hilt. "I'm afraid the King's instructions were quite specific, my lord. He was most insistent that visiting nobles receive immediate attention." Elena watched this polite battle of wills with fascination and terror. She could see that the guards were trying to separate Lord Marcus from her mother, without triggering a dangerous confrontation, but she could also see that the criminal leader was becoming suspicious of the sudden change in protocol. Queen Isabella rose gracefully from her throne, bringing Elena with her. "Indeed, Lord Marcus, we would be honored if you would accept our hospitality. The royal guest quarters offer a much more comfortable setting for extended diplomatic conversations." This was part of the emergency plan as well. By moving the royal family away from the throne room, Captain Rodriguez could deal with the criminals more effectively while ensuring that the Queen and Princess were protected by a separate group of guards But Lord Marcus was too experienced to be easily manipulated. Elena saw his eyes narrow as he calculated the sudden changes in the situation. His companions were also becoming alert, their hands moving closer to concealed weapons that Elena now realized they had been carrying all along. "Your Majesty is most kind," Lord Marcus said slowly, "but I believe we have traveled too far to leave without completing our most important business." The politeness was finally dropping from his voice, and Elena could hear the underlying threat in his words. The dangerous game of pretense was coming to an end, and whatever happened next would determine whether the royal family survived this carefully planned attack. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, his loyalty to the crown overriding any concerns about diplomatic protocol. "I'm afraid, my lord, that all visitors to the palace must follow our security procedures. For the safety of the royal family, I must insist that you and your men accompany Lieutenant Santos immediately." Lord Marcus smiled coldly, and finally revealed his true nature. "And what if we refuse, Captain? What if we have business here that cannot wait for your hospitality?" The throne room erupted into controlled chaos as both sides abandoned their careful pretenses and prepared for the confrontation that had been building since the moment Lord Marcus first entered the palace. The moment of truth had arrived, and Elena found herself at the center of a crisis that would test everything her mother had taught her about courage, responsibility, and protecting the people she loved. Lord Marcus reached inside his elaborate coat and withdrew a gleaming dagger. His diplomatic mask finally discarded completely. His companions followed suit, revealing an assortment of concealed weapons that proved they had never intended a peaceful visit to the palace. "Your Majesty," Lord Marcus said with mock courtesy, "I'm afraid our business here is far more urgent than your guards seem to understand. We have come for your kingdom's treasury, and we will not be leaving empty-handed." Captain Rodriguez immediately positioned himself between the criminals and the royal family, his sword drawn in one fluid motion. The other guards in the throne room responded instantly, creating a protective barrier around Queen Isabella and Elena, while surrounding Lord Marcus and his men. But Elena quickly realized that the criminals had planned for this possibility. They had positioned themselves strategically around the throne room, and now each of them was holding a hostage. From among the innocent petitioners who had been seeking the Queen's help that morning, the elderly farmer who had requested aid with his land dispute was now pressed against one of the criminals, a knife at his throat. The merchant who had wanted to expand his shop was similarly trapped, his eyes wide with terror as he became an unwilling shield for another of Lord Marcus's men. "Now, Captain," Lord Marcus said with satisfied confidence, "I believe the situation has become much more complicated. Unless you want these loyal subjects of your kingdom to suffer for your interference, you will order your men to lower their weapons." Elena watched in horror as the standoff developed. The criminals had turned her mother's own compassion against her by threatening innocent people who had come to the palace seeking help and protection. It was a cruel and clever strategy that put the royal guards in an impossible position. Queen Isabella's face went pale as she saw the terror in her subjects' eyes. These were people who had trusted the royal family to keep them safe, and now they were in mortal danger because of that trust. "Please," the Queen said, her voice steady despite the fear Elena could see in her eyes. "These people have done nothing wrong. If you want to negotiate, release them and speak with me directly." Lord Marcus laughed coldly. "Your Majesty, you seem to misunderstand the situation. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to take what we want, and your cooperation will determine how many people get hurt in the process." Elena felt a surge of anger that surprised her with its intensity. These criminals were threatening her mother, terrorizing innocent people, and violating the sanctuary of the palace that represented safety and justice for everyone in the kingdom. But more than anger, Elena felt a deep sense of responsibility. Her mother had taught her that being a princess meant protecting others, even when it was dangerous or difficult. The secret signals had been just the beginning of Elena's real education in royal duty. Elena stepped forward, drawing surprised looks from everyone in the throne room. "Lord Marcus," she said in a clear, strong voice that carried surprising authority for someone so young, "you said that children often see things that adults miss." Lord Marcus turned his attention to Elena with amusement and curiosity. "Indeed, little princess. And what do you see that we adults have overlooked?" Elena looked directly into his eyes, drawing on every lesson her mother had taught her about courage and leadership. I see that you have made a very serious mistake. The criminal leader raised an eyebrow, clearly entertained by the idea that a child might challenge him. And what mistake is that, Your Highness? Elena smiled with confidence that came from knowledge Lord Marcus did not possess. You assumed that the secret signal I gave was just to alert our guards in this room. For the first time since revealing his true intentions, Lord Marcus looked uncertain. What are you talking about, child? Queen Isabella watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and terror, realizing that Elena was about to reveal something that could either save them all or put them in even greater danger. Elena continued with the composure of someone far beyond her years. The signal I gave was not just for Captain Rodriguez. It was also sent to every guard post throughout the palace, to the royal messenger service, and to our allies in the surrounding kingdoms. This was not entirely true, but Elena had learned from watching her mother that sometimes a princess had to use strategy and deception to protect her people. The key was making Lord Marcus believe that his carefully planned attack had already been discovered and countered. By now, Elena continued, the palace is completely surrounded by reinforcements. Messengers have been sent to recall my father and his royal guard, and neighboring kingdoms have been alerted to watch for your escape routes. Lord Marcus's confidence began to waver as he processed the implications of what the young princess was telling him. If she was right, his group was trapped in a palace that was becoming a fortress with every passing minute. Elena took another step forward, her small size making her words even more dramatic. You came here thinking you were hunting the royal family, Lord Marcus. But you made one mistake. You forgot that sometimes the hunter becomes the hunted. The throne room fell silent as everyone absorbed the impact of Elena's words. The question now was whether her brave gamble would save them all, or make their situation even more dangerous. Lord Marcus stared at Elena with a mixture of disbelief and growing concern. The 8-year-old princess had just challenged him with more confidence and strategic thinking than many adult opponents he had faced in his criminal career. You're bluffing, little girl, he said, but Elena could hear uncertainty creeping into his voice. A child playing games she doesn't understand. Elena maintained her steady gaze, drawing strength from her mother's presence beside her and the knowledge that she was fighting for everyone she loved. Captain Rodriguez, she said without taking her eyes off Lord Marcus. Please tell our guests about the horn signals they heard when they entered the palace grounds. Captain Rodriguez caught on immediately to Elena's strategy. 3 short blasts followed by 2 long ones, Your Highness. The signal indicating that potential threats have been identified and all security protocols are now active. This was partially true. The horn signals had indeed been sounded, though they were part of the normal emergency response rather than the elaborate network Elena had described. But Lord Marcus had no way of knowing the difference. One of Lord Marcus's men whispered urgently in his leader's ear. We did hear horns when we arrived. I thought they were ceremonial. Elena pressed her advantage, speaking with the authority her mother had taught her to project when representing the crown. Lord Marcus, you and your men are criminals who prey on royal families. But you have never faced a kingdom that was expecting you. The truth was that Elena was terrified, but she had learned from watching her mother that leadership sometimes meant acting brave, even when you felt afraid. The innocent people being held hostage were depending on her, and she would not let them down. Queen Isabella stepped forward to stand beside her daughter, adding her own authority to Elena's words. My daughter speaks the truth, Lord Marcus. Your intelligence about our kingdom was incomplete. We have been aware of your activities in neighboring regions for some time. This was also a strategic exaggeration, but it was delivered with such conviction that Lord Marcus's remaining confidence began to crumble. The carefully planned attack was turning into a potential trap, and he could see his men becoming nervous about their situation. Captain Rodriguez seized the moment to apply additional pressure. Lord Marcus, I can offer you and your men safe passage out of the kingdom if you release the hostages immediately and surrender your weapons. This offer expires in exactly 2 minutes. The criminal leader looked around the throne room calculating his options. His men were outnumbered by the royal guards. The innocent hostages were becoming increasingly panicked and difficult to control, and the possibility that the palace was surrounded by reinforcements made escape seem unlikely. But Lord Marcus was not ready to surrender. Even if what you say is true, he said to Elena, we still have these people as shields. Your guards cannot attack us without risking their lives. Elena had anticipated this response. You're right that we won't risk innocent lives, she agreed. But you're wrong about something else. What's that, little princess? Elena smiled with wisdom beyond her years. You think holding hostages gives you power, but it actually makes you weaker. Lord Marcus frowned, confused by her statement. Explain yourself, child. Every moment you spend holding those people, you become more desperate and make worse decisions, Elena said. Meanwhile, our reinforcements are getting closer. Your escape routes are being blocked, and your men are realizing that following you was a mistake. Elena could see that her words were having an effect not just on Lord Marcus, but on his companions as well. They had signed up for what was supposed to be a quick and profitable robbery, not an extended siege against a prepared enemy in the heart of a royal palace. One of the criminals holding the elderly farmer looked nervously toward the throne room's exits, clearly wondering if he should abandon his leader and try to escape on his own. The man threatening the merchant was sweating heavily, his confidence evaporating as he realized the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Elena pressed her psychological advantage. Lord Marcus, your men are starting to understand what you haven't realized yet. This mission has failed. The only question now is whether you're smart enough to minimize the consequences or proud enough to make things worse for everyone. Queen Isabella watched her daughter with amazement and pride. Elena was demonstrating leadership skills that typically took years to develop, turning a desperate situation around through courage, intelligence, and the ability to read people's fears and motivations. Lord Marcus looked around at his increasingly nervous men, then at the determined faces of the royal guards, and finally at the small princess who had somehow turned his carefully planned attack into a potential disaster. The moment of decision had arrived, and everyone in the throne room held their breath as they waited to see whether Elena's brave gamble would succeed in saving them all. The tension in the throne room reached its breaking point as Lord Marcus weighed his rapidly diminishing options. Elena could see the calculation in his eyes as he realized that his perfect plan had been outmaneuvered by an 8-year-old princess who refused to be intimidated. 1 minute remaining, Captain Rodriguez announced calmly, his sword ready but his voice offering one final chance for a peaceful resolution. Elena watched as one of Lord Marcus's men, the youngest of the group, began to crack under the pressure. He was holding the merchant hostage, but his hands were shaking and his eyes kept darting toward the exits as if planning his own escape. Marcus, the young criminal whispered urgently, maybe we should take the offer. This isn't what we planned for. Lord Marcus turned angrily toward his subordinate. Silence. I don't take orders from children or cowards. But Elena could see that his authority over his men was crumbling. The other criminals were exchanging worried glances, clearly having second thoughts about following a leader whose plan had fallen apart so completely. Elena decided to make one final push that would either end the crisis or escalate it to dangerous new levels. Lord Marcus, she said with quiet authority, your men are losing faith in you because they can see what you refuse to admit. You're not in control anymore. The criminal leader's face flushed with anger and humiliation. Being challenged by a child was bad enough, but having that challenge witnessed by his own men was unbearable for someone whose leadership depended on projecting strength and competence. Enough, Lord Marcus shouted, raising his dagger threateningly. I'll show you what happens to little princesses who forget their place. But as he moved toward Elena, everything changed in an instant. The young criminal holding the merchant finally broke, releasing his hostage and stepping away with his hands raised in surrender. I'm out, Marcus. This is insane. His defection triggered a cascade of betrayals as the other criminals realized that their mission had become a suicide trap. Within seconds, all of Lord Marcus's men had released their hostages and were backing away from their leader, leaving him isolated and alone in the center of the throne room. Captain Rodriguez and his guards immediately secured the innocent petitioners, moving them to safety behind the protective barrier around the royal family. The criminals who had surrendered were quickly disarmed and restrained, but their cooperation earned them gentler treatment than their stubborn leader would receive. Lord Marcus found himself facing a dozen drawn swords with no allies, no hostages, and no escape routes. His elaborate plan had been destroyed not by superior force but by the courage and intelligence of a young princess who had refused to be a victim. Surrender your weapon. Marcus, Captain Rodriguez commanded. "You're surrounded and alone. There's no point in making this worse." For a moment, Elena thought the criminal leader might try one final desperate attack, but the fight had gone out of him as he realized the complete failure of his mission. The dagger fell from his hand with a metallic clatter that echoed through the suddenly quiet throne room. As the guards secured Lord Marcus, Elena felt her legs suddenly become weak with relief and delayed fear. The enormous responsibility she had carried during the crisis finally lifted from her small shoulders, and she realized just how terrified she had been throughout the entire ordeal. Queen Isabella immediately pulled Elena into a protective embrace, holding her daughter tightly while tears of pride and relief streamed down her face. "My brave, brilliant little princess," she whispered. "You saved us all." Elena buried her face in her mother's shoulder, finally allowing herself to feel like a frightened child rather than a royal protector. But even in her relief, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had proven herself worthy of the trust her mother had placed in her. Captain Rodriguez approached the royal family with deep respect in his eyes. "Your Highness," he said to Elena, "I have served this kingdom for 15 years and I have never seen braver or more intelligent leadership under pressure. You have truly proven yourself to be a princess worthy of the crown you will someday wear." Elena looked up at the captain with eyes still bright with unshed tears. "I was so scared," she admitted honestly. "But Mother taught me that being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave." Queen Isabella smiled through her own tears. "And you have taught us all that courage comes in many forms, my darling. Sometimes the smallest person in the room can be the strongest." The innocent petitioners who had been held hostage gathered around the royal family, expressing their gratitude and amazement at what they had witnessed. The elderly farmer, whose life had been threatened, knelt before Elena with tears in his eyes. "Your Highness," he said with deep emotion, "you risked everything to save us. I will tell this story to my grandchildren, and they will tell it to theirs. The kingdom will never forget the day a little princess saved the throne room with nothing but courage and wisdom." As the immediate crisis passed and the criminals were led away to the palace dungeons, Elena began to understand the full significance of what had happened. She had not just helped capture some thieves. She had proven that the royal family's commitment to protecting their people was genuine and unshakable. News of the princess's heroic actions spread throughout the palace within hours. Servants, guards, and nobles alike spoke in hushed, amazed tones about how 8-year-old Elena had outmaneuvered experienced criminals and saved innocent lives through quick thinking and remarkable bravery. When King Carlos returned from his diplomatic mission 3 days later, he found his palace buzzing with stories of his daughter's courage. Elena ran to greet him at the palace gates, finally able to be completely carefree now that her father was home safe. "Papa," she called out, launching herself into his arms for a hug that seemed to last forever. King Carlos had already heard the full story from Captain Rodriguez's detailed report, but he wanted to hear it directly from Elena herself. That evening, as the royal family sat together in their private quarters, Elena recounted every detail of the crisis and how her mother's secret training had prepared her for the moment when it mattered most. "I'm so proud of both my queens," King Carlos said, looking at his wife and daughter with infinite love and admiration. "Isabella, you prepared our daughter perfectly for leadership, and Elena, you showed wisdom and courage that many adults never develop." Elena snuggled between her parents, finally able to fully relax and feel safe again. "Will there be more bad people who try to hurt our kingdom, Papa?" King Carlos considered his answer carefully. "Perhaps, my darling. But now I know that our kingdom has 2 powerful protectors watching over it. Your mother has always been my strongest ally, and now you have proven that you will be just as fierce a guardian of our people." The experience had changed Elena in ways that would influence the rest of her life. She had discovered that true leadership meant protecting others even when you were afraid, that intelligence could be more powerful than weapons, and that the responsibility of royalty was not about privilege but about service to others. Years later, when Elena became queen herself, she would establish a new tradition in the kingdom. Every young member of the royal family would learn, not just the formal protocols of leadership, but also the secret signals and emergency procedures that could save lives in moments of crisis. And in the palace gardens, beneath the same oak tree where Queen Isabella had first taught Elena about the silent language of protection, Elena would teach her own children that courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to do what is right even when you are afraid. The story of the day when a little princess raised her hand and saved the kingdom became legendary throughout the land, inspiring generations of young people to believe that age and size matter far less than courage and wisdom when it comes to protecting the people you love.